This week on Words and Numbers, Google,
Pizza,
World War II munitions,
and were the 1950s really all that great?
all this and more coming up next on Words and Numbers, a Civil original production. Check us out at civil.com. That's CIVL.com.
Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
Well, I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole. I ran across an article this week about a guy, I guess he was owns a pizza store or a number of pizza stores near the Pentagon, who some years ago noticed that right before there's some big political military thing worldwide, there's a spike in pizza orders late at night at the Pentagon. And apparently the Pentagon then, later on discovered this and said, oh my God, we're signaling because everybody's there late at night doing whatever they do. So Pentagon made arrangements to have, I don't know if they have pizza or whatever, but Subways and other things inside the Pentagon so they don't order out as much. But in preparation for this discussion, I'm looking up this thing. And so I do a search for, they call it PizzaInt, Pizza Intelligence. Would you believe there's a website? Check it out, PizzaInt.watch. We're currently at DoCon 4. You can see, I'm looking at Domino's Pizza, Extreme Pizza, District Pizza, Palace, We the Pizza, Pizzato Pizza, Papa John's Pizza, all presumably located near the Pentagon. And there's a graph here, and it's showing me, for example, Papa John's, there's a 300% spike in pizza orders right now. From Papa John's.
That's because we're going to hit Iran any day now.
Well, you would think so, except Pizzato Pizza is down 90% based on their normal orders this time of day. But these guys have got this all tracked out of the average orders by hour, time of day, and then they show you what's actually going on right now, and that gives them puts us at DoCon 4.
I'm going to make this part of my daily ritual, so please do send me the link to that, because I can't wait to start monitoring this nonsense to figure out when the next catastrophe is going to happen.
This is one of these interesting things that pops up now and again. The one thing that sticks in my mind that was popular some years ago is some economists discovered that they can get a proxy for economic activity by with satellites taking pictures, seeing how much light is being illuminated from countries. And the theory being, the more light that is being thrown off at night, the more economic activity is there. And of course, the famous picture is of the Korean Peninsula.
Yep.
And you can
one of my all-time favorite pictures.
Yeah, it's like the North Korea is completely dark, except for one spot that's, what is the capital? Pyongyang? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, other than that, it's completely dark. Meanwhile, South Korea, lights everywhere all along the border, kind of out in the sea because of islands or ships or what have you. But interesting things like this, you wouldn't think of, actually can throw off some useful information.
Yeah, no, another pretty famous one is Waffle House and natural disasters.
Yes.
Right, that's fascinating. Waffle Houses literally never close.
Yeah, if they are, closed, something bad's happened.
Something dreadful has happened. But and more than that, you can actually pick up a phone and call a Waffle House and say, how's it look out there?
Yeah.
I mean, you can use this any number of ways.
Another one like that is the Big Mac Index.
Yeah.
Because one of the hard things about measuring inflation is that the quality of goods change. A car today is not the same as a car in 1950, for example. But Big Mac is a Big Mac is a Big Mac, always has been, always will be, is everywhere on the planet. And so we can get an idea of the cost of living one place versus another simply by asking, what's a Big Mac cost?
Yep, that's right. If I want to find out how much it costs to live in Istanbul, the Big Mac Index is likely the very first thing I'm going to look at.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to talk, Ant, about something that you and I have never actually talked about, but that I'm guessing is bothering us both so much at this point that it's time. And I'm talking about, for lack of a better word, the enshittification of Google search. Have you stopped using Google search yet?
Now that you mention it,
I stopped today.
yeah, I did, and it came in pieces, because what I started doing was, I would type in the thing not in Google, but I always type it in the URL, and it goes to the AI. And I've been using the AI, and then finally I said, heck with that, I'll just use ChatGPT.
Yeah, I was doing the same thing, and the AI was quite useful. But today I got a bunch of absolutely useless search results from AI, from the Google AI, whatever the hell it's called. I can't remember. And I said, no, this is not what I'm looking for, because it just sent me links to web pages. I'm looking for an answer to this question from you, : question, in quotation marks. A 4-year-old could have figured out what I was asking for. Couldn't have answered, but could have figured out what I was asking for. And it sent me back the exact same links as after I pressed enter.
Yeah.
And I said, well, all right, let me scroll down and see if any of this got into the web search results. For the space available on my laptop screen, I had to scroll through one entire screen's worth of sponsored content before I got the first result.
Yeah.
So first, its AI doesn't work. When I tell it how to work, it tells me to go to hell and does the exact same thing. Then I scroll down and I have to look at an entire page of sponsored content before I got anywhere.
Yeah.
I figured, all right, I got to find a new search engine, and this is probably going to take a minute. But I went ahead and threw Bing in there just for the hell of it. And I tend to have kind of an unpleasant disposition toward all things Microsoft. And I don't particularly
toward all things.
I don't particularly like the idea of using Bing. And I can't yet speak to whether the search results it gives me are qualitatively better, worse, or the same as Google. What I can tell you is I see the search results immediately. And the AI integration on Bing, pretty good. Pretty good. So I'm still using Gmail. I still use YouTube. I have Google TV. But Alphabet just lost me as far as the search engine goes. And that's where they started. So,
well,
see you later, Google.
It's interesting you talk about the sponsored links. It reminds me of something I wasn't aware I was doing it, and then became consciously aware of it. When I'm searching for something on Amazon, of course, the sponsored stuff comes up first.
Yeah.
I discovered that I've been skipping over the sponsored stuff completely. And I'm thinking, why am I doing that? And then it occurred to me, of course, because if the stuff were really good, it wouldn't have to be sponsored. It would show up top of the list because that's the thing that people always choose. So if you're sponsored, you're telling me that you actually aren't that good.
Yeah, that's right. And look, people talk about Google's monopoly all the time. Well, within 1 second, I had 8 different search engines I could have chosen from.
Right. Right.
Am I gonna stick with Bing? No idea. DuckDuckGo makes a very persuasive case because now I'm not being tracked. But the results just don't seem to be quite as good. And there's a bunch of others. I'm gonna check them all out. And Google can go straight to hell. If you're making me angry as I'm trying to do my work,
right.
I mean, look, if you're not making it better, you're making it worse. And Google's making it worse. So out they go. This is not a monopoly. Never was. I've got lots of choices. So do you. If you don't like Google, go find something else. Which, of course,
I do.
Oh, you've got more.
No, I'm just going to say, I do find that AI is really, really good. Actually, scarily good at finding things when I can't describe them well. Let's scratch that. Finding things when I don't know the names. So
Yes.
one time I was asking it, what's the movie with that guy who does the thing in the this? And it shows me that it's got the right answer just from my saying basically what I just said to you.
Yeah, no, and I find it gets me the right answer like 98% of the time, and I'm not much to work on at all.
Yeah.
I wish I could afford the pro version of ChatGPT. I cannot. So my my AI of choice is Grok, which works pretty damn well, actually.
Mm-hmm. I've heard Grok is good. I've also heard our friend Clark uses Claude. He says Claude is quite
Claude, good. I had problems with Claude early on. I hear that they've all been fixed and it's a world better. I haven't been back. And I do believe Claude, see, one of the problems, if you're not paying for it, you get limitations.
Right.
And if you have limitations, you can't ask all the iterative questions you need to ask to get the answer you need to get.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You just, at some point when you're almost there and you type a question in, ChatGPT will tell you to check back in 5 hours when you're allowed to have another question. And I just can't do that. Grok lets you go no matter what. Just keeps right on going. But Ant, I have the foolishness of the week. And you heard me say that it was going to be about World War II artillery. I misspoke. It's about World War I artillery. But that is, by any estimation, it's not about that at all. Because, and we're talking about roughly an 8-inch piece of artillery. If I had to guess, looking at a picture of not the same piece of artillery for reasons that will become quite obvious in a moment, but of a very similar piece of artillery, it looks like it might be 5 inches around. So it's 8 inches long. It's probably 5 inches around. And the incident in question comes from France, a country deeply involved in World War I, as you likely know. And why am I talking about World War I artillery and beating around the bush the way I am? It's because a young man had to go to the hospital, largely because of an injury from this artillery, from World War I, that he received when he inserted it into himself.
Oh, my God. Why do you have to talk about this?
They had to evacuate the entire hospital. Except for that team of remarkably amused surgeons who were tasked with removing said piece of artillery from this young man's posterior.
Oh, my God.
So, work with me here for a second. Because this young man was wandering about and found a piece of artillery from World War I. and he didn't say, oh God, let's be worried. He didn't say, we got to get this checked. He didn't say, perhaps a museum would enjoy having this on display. No. What he said was, I bet this will fit inside of me.
Oh, my God.
And apparently, the incident, as it has come to be known in my mind, they theorize, was part of a party. People actually have parties dedicated to this sort of thing.
Do these parties necessarily include pieces of artillery, or was that just a bonus?
Yeah, I think that's just a bonus. It seems to involve, and look, this is not my lifestyle, Ant. This is only conjecture. It seems to revolve around that omnipresent question, do you think that'll fit?
Oh, my God.
Like I said, man, this is the single greatest, most foolishness of the week we have ever had.
I bet
And
we're
likely
tired of foolishness now.
and are likely to ever have. This one just wears the brown crown. And I would just leave it at that.
I'm Anthony Davies, co-host of Words and Numbers. James Harrigan and I are proud to be on Civil's network because we believe in their unifying principle of human respect, which is the idea that our well-being as humans is diminished when we employ coercion, and that conversely our happiness and prosperity are maximized when we cooperate. If you believe in our mission, join civil.com. That's CIVL.com. Comedian, author, and political satirist Andrew Heaton joins us this week. Andrew is host of the podcast The Political Orphanage and the sci-fi deep dive podcast Alienating the Audience. He's a frequent contributor to Reason TV and hosted the popular web series Mostly Weekly.
And I still think he's a pretty nice guy.
Andrew, welcome back to Words and Numbers. You complained the last time that we haven't had you on in a long time, so now we get back-to-back Andrew.
Perfect. Okay, so the lesson learned here is complain more. All right, I'll do it. Good
Right.
back.
Works every time.
Andrew, you said something that I've talked a lot about life today versus life in the past, but you said something that I thought framed it beautifully. I've never heard before. You said, what if 1950s wasn't a time but a place?
Yeah, so I got really interested in this 2 or 3 years ago. My parents are baby boomers, and I've had conversations with them and some of their friends, and there's a nostalgia there that I think is good on the emotional side and completely wrong on the economic side. So I would hear things like, things were just cheaper in the 50s. It was easier. I had a conversation with a relative a few years ago where she went, we were driving around her hometown and she was kind of pointing out landmarks. And she went, we used to play in the park there when I was a kid. You couldn't do that anymore because, kidnappings and whatnot. And I went, have you seen any data on that? Because I don't know that there's any actual statistics. She's like, no, we never heard about it. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you were 8. Like, your parents weren't going to tell you about child murder.
Right.
Like I grew up in the 80s, and I wasn't worried about the real estate market cratering because I was 8 years old. And I think that a lot of the time what goes on, which is very understandable, is people are nostalgic about their childhoods for good reason. If you had a good childhood, you should be nostalgic about it. Your family was there. You were surrounded by love. You weren't worried about things. That's great. That's beautiful. And I'm glad that you enjoyed that. But the good news is that while your childhood is over, stuff's way better now. We could make an argument that there are non-quantifiable things, like maybe your sense of belonging or your sense of purpose, like that. I'm open to that. But if we're just talking about how it was easier to buy a house and life was cheaper and people were paid more, it's pretty much a slam dunk. And what I decided to do was, when people tend to tackle the 50s, which really stands out in the American mind, I think because that's when television came out and also just the aesthetics are so cool, people really fixate on that. We tend to look at it, understandably, as a period of history. And so what I did on the Political Orphanage, my show, is I did an episode on what if the 50s wasn't a time we could go back to? What if it was an actual place that's around right now? We're going to call it 50s land. We're going to get on a plane. We're going to go to 50s land. And at the end of the episode, we're going to make a call on whether we want to stay in 50s land or come back home to now. And basically, the long story short is, if 50s land were a place, and we were looking at the economic performance of 50s land versus today, and you had the ability to migrate there if you wanted to, we would look at 50s land kind of how we looked at the Eastern Bloc right when it came out of communism, as quaint, white, having lots of nice things about it, nice people, like good family life, all sorts of good things, not putting the country down. But in terms of who has a better economy, for not just the overall GDP, but the median person, it's no question that life is better now than it was in the 50s. Stuff is cheaper. We make more money. There's one or two different realms that the 50s has us beat on, but I would argue that when you look at it in its totality, it's rather overwhelming that no, it's not better in the 50s than it is now. You wouldn't want to live in 50s land.
Yeah, and you point to television. I think that's part of the thing. We see television and we assume that, oh, that's what the 50s were.
Yeah.
No, that's television. That's like assuming that, oh, well, in 2020, cops live in high rises in downtown Manhattan. No, that's in the movies.
Yes.
It doesn't actually work that way.
100%. Or like understanding New York economics at the turn of the 20th century by watching Friends, where they all live in these beautiful. Well, I lived in New York City for 5 years, and I did that 15 years after it went off the air, and I lived in a converted dumbwaiter where I had to sell organs in order to pay for it. And they're living. No, that's beautiful. Or like alternately, you will find that a disproportionate amount of sitcom characters are college educated. Why is that? It's because the writers that put them together went to college. And so that's the worldview that they're inhabiting. Some of the things right off the bat that we can dispel from the 50s are you'll see these memes pop up periodically that in the 1950s you had a one-earner household and 2 cars and a vacation and a big house. And no, the data is pretty solid on that. That is not the case. First of all, way more women worked in the 50s than what we gather based on watching June Cleaver. We're seeing a slice of 1950s life that's really upper class white people. But even within the overall average American, it was, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, the episodes from a couple of years ago, but it's like maybe 40% of women worked. And it was very common to work, and then you got married, maybe you did part-time work. That was very common. It was not common to have 2 cars. That was a luxury item if you had 2 cars. Most families in the 50s had 1 car, and that car was way worse than what we have today. Every car you can buy today is cheaper, more reliable, and more comfortable than anything they had in the 1950s. And then
I'm with you on cars. Yeah, I'm with you on cars. I want to come back to that. But before we get too far away from it, because people say this to me as well, that, well, it was one-income household. Women didn't work back in the day. And, of course, the numbers that you're quoting I've seen as well. But, there were more women who weren't working. Sorry. There were more women who were, the way I phrase it, they were working. They just weren't being paid.
Yes. Very true.
And so what were they doing?
Yeah.
They were doing all sorts of things during the day that we have machines that do now. So women are working today just as much as they were in the past. The difference is now they get a paycheck.
You know what? I wish I'd spoken to you before I put that episode together. That's a really good point. Absolutely true. The amount of labor done is lower that we have to do. And on top of that, there's some other statistical things too. Like when you get into in taxes, we look at household income. We don't look at individuals, right? That's how we do most of our statistics. So it's one of those things where when you look at how households were doing in the 50s in terms of purchasing parity power, occasionally you'll find things that look like, yeah, the households were doing better if you were 27 years old than they were now. But part of that is also the fact that people are getting married less frequently and later. And so if you were to take the same amount of people that were getting married in the 50s, and they did have a higher rate of marriage, the divorce rate was actually pretty similar. The divorce rate spiked in the 80s, but it's back down to about where it was in the 50s. The difference is people aren't getting married as frequently or as early. But if you were to take everybody like me that probably would have been married by my age in the 50s and combine those household incomes, you'd suddenly see the statistics change again. A lot of that stuff is completely illusionary, where we're looking at a televised simulacrum or an uneducated meme rather than the actual reality of how much people were earning. Another example, food was way more expensive in the 50s, and this is inarguable. You can look at how much people were paying with inflation-adjusted income, and I realize that figuring out inflation, it's a lot of art and a little bit of science, but if you remove that and just look at how much did people spend on food as a percentage of their income? That was much higher in the 50s than it is now. And one of the reasons that one of the examples you can see of that is we eat out way more now than we did in the 1950s.
Oh my God, yeah.
Because you couldn't afford to do it in the 1950s. Maybe once a month you'd go out. I think the average was like in the 50s, you would eat out maybe once a week. The median person would eat out maybe once a week. And now it's like a quarter of all meals are consumed out. Now that's probably including breakfast. Maybe that's people getting, like a breakfast burrito or something on their way to work. But But people are able to afford to eat out so much more now than they were back then. And then culturally, if you want to get in a little bit more too, the food we have is better. Like I'm from Oklahoma. I remember when sushi came to Oklahoma, there were articles written about this Japanese food with raw fish. And like now, I can get Kiwano melon plume in a grocery store in Wagner, Oklahoma. The variety that's available everywhere in the country is better and cheaper.
Yeah, and this is the thing, I can remember as a kid, and I notice now I don't hear it anymore. People saying something's in season.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, you wanted watermelon, you got it certain months of the year. Other months of the year, you don't get watermelon because it's not in season. Not to say it's too expensive. It doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's something else leaning on the data that you're working with too, especially where it comes to marriage, home ownership, things like this. We're living quite a lot longer than we did in the 50s.
Yeah.
And in a portion of that time that we live longer, we're being educated longer than we were in the 1950s. So between the vast expanse of your new lifespan and the time you spend in college, look, that's going to skew the data every which way.
Yeah, all of that's true. And again, if we were comparing 50s land as a contemporary country to the United States, we would look at that and go, their lifespans are significantly cheaper, or excuse me, significantly smaller. We could say, and this would be accurate, that the amount of money people spend on medicine in 50s land is smaller than that which we pay. The people are paying less a proportion of their income on medicine over there in 50s land. That's true. But also, the quality of medicine you're getting in 50s land is much worse. In the 50s, you've got very rudimentary chemotherapy that's very rudimentary. For the most part, you're getting antibiotics and x-rays. That's it. And so, like, no one in America would be traveling to 50s land for medical treatment today. That would be insane. You would not do that, even if it were cheaper. And you're getting so much more that we're getting a far better deal with the quality of healthcare and the variety of, like, I'd be dead at least 2 times over if I were born in the 50s, just because I had things that happened in childhood that I probably would have died from, that we now have that are so much better.
Yeah, I would also not be alive. But there's a little more to it too, right? Because not only is healthcare not, let's call it suboptimal in 50s land, so is nutrition. It's deeply suboptimal.
Yeah.
Right. And literally all the things that pile into the one metric, lifespan, they're all suboptimal.
Yes, all of that's true. Where I think, like, there are a few things that we could say about it. Housing was cheaper, but I need to put in a couple of caveats there. One, houses are larger now. People prefer larger houses than they did. I went by the house my mom grew up in, and it was considerably smaller than the house I grew up in, which is, the kids all had bunk beds, staying in one room. My dad grew up in a 2-bedroom house with 3 kids. That was very common back then. Stuff that we would consider a deprivation today in most instances. We would view that as, kind of working class, food on the table, but not really affluent. And you can argue that that's better. I, for one, am a very big proponent of having more varieties of housing and less restrictions on housing. But there are a few other things too. The kind of starter home idea that you could buy a cheap starter home, you can still do that. You do have to travel outside of the periphery of the city in order to do it, but you can go get, like, in effect, a house that is as cheap as the 50s if you want to get, like, modular housing, and it would be about the same size. And then the stuff that we are fighting in terms of rising housing costs are all supply side. It's because we've got, these laborious zoning restrictions that are going on. Then there were a few other things they were dealing with that were not, like, they had rapid suburbanization. Well, we've already kind of done the low-hanging fruit on that, where we can build greater and greater suburbs, but the distance to the core is going to be smaller. So that was kind of a one-time trick we could do of suddenly expanding all that land. Now we got to build up rather than out if we want to have that same kind of phenomenon.
I've done the math on housing. I don't have figures going back to 1950, but I do have them going to the mid-1980s. And the median house today is twice the square footage of the median house in 1984, double.
Wow.
And the average number of people in the house is half.
Yeah.
So on a per person basis, per person per square foot, you're getting 4 times the amount of house as you were getting in 1984. Plus, then you got the HVAC, which James and I have talked about this before. When I was a teenager, we got our first air conditioner, and we were not a poor household, but that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
We didn't have. Well, nobody had HVAC. It didn't exist, but very few people got air conditioning even.
We're on that note of like the technological gizmos that are available to us. Were we to go to 50s land and pull out our iPhones, it would be insane. I went down a rabbit hole on how much computing power would you need in order to have an iPhone in 1950s, and how much would it cost? And what I ended up calculating was that if you wanted a supercomputer, which is what everybody has in their pocket, everybody has a supercomputer with the entire world's library and millions of hours of entertainment, not to mention books and everything else you want, to have that I carry in my pocket would require a building about the same size as the Pentagon that's just computers. I'm not working in heat ducts and things, just the raw computing power. And to build it would require the annual GDP of Canada to do that at that time. So it's
Right.
It's an incredible amount. And I do appreciate, I'm 42. I don't own a house. And it's hard for me to get to the point where I'm going to be able to get one and live where I want to live. It was easier back then. I think if you were in a choice area to buy a home, I think that's probably accurate. I don't know that the housing is as restricted everywhere else in the country outside of kind of the top 10 metropolitan cities. But one of the statistics that really surprised me was that home ownership is actually the same now as it was in the 50s, if not a little bit better. And that's across age cohorts. Because what I thought was going to happen is I thought that there was going to be more home ownership today, but that's just because people are living longer and older people are more apt to buy a home. But even when I looked at people ages like 18 to 25, the home ownership rates were about the same. So it's not that there was this huge change in it. I think, and I could be wrong because again, this is a couple of years ago. I think the percentage that people spend on their houses has gone up. So the allocation we spend on houses, that has increased. People can, I think, rightly gripe about that. And I would urge you to focus those gripes on NIMBYism, which are the root cause of why you're paying more for houses.
Yeah, and that you're absolutely correct about that. However, again, if you adjust on a per square foot basis, it's actually come down.
Yeah.
Housing is 10 to 20% cheaper. But what's interesting is over the course of roughly 1980 through 2020, price of housing went steadily up, adjusted for inflation. It's going steadily up, but mortgage rates were coming steadily down.
Oh, interesting.
And the result was that for about a 30-year period, the mortgage on a newly purchased house was, in today's dollars, $2,000 a month. It was always $2,000 a month.
Huh.
Adjusted for inflation.
Really?
For 30 years.
Okay.
What changed come 2021, 2022, it wasn't so, yes, the housing prices did rise faster, but that wasn't the big thing. The big thing was the mortgage rates. The mortgage rates went from 2% to almost 7%, and that's what blew up over the course of 2 years. The mortgage on a newly purchased house doubled.
Okay. Interesting. I see. I want to do, I want to do a follow-up episode sometime this year on was life cheaper in the 80s? Because I was born in 84. And I will also acknowledge I don't know because I've not done the data on that. But I do want to go into more recent memory. And I'm going to tuck that in my back pocket. That's a really good thing to do.
Yeah. Mid-80s were a really expensive time to live.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things, and this is true for the 80s and for the 50s, there's this idea that's promulgated very much by the MAGA crowd that we don't make things in America anymore. And if 50s land is a country today, we have a bigger export economy than it does. We export more stuff now. Now, what's changed is twofold. Yes, our proportion of the export economies gone down because Europe had been obliterated from World War II. So if you're just concerned that we're doing better than other countries in the amount of stuff we sell, I guess. But the reality is we make and sell more stuff to foreigners than we did in the 1950s. And it would be lagging behind us if it were a contemporary country. And then the other thing is, it's not that we quit making things, it's that we make more expensive things. The stuff that America exports is primarily computers, aviation, stuff that involves a highly skilled workforce. Whereas, in the 1950s, we were doing textile and we were making sandals and whatnot. But today, if you were comparing, say, Indonesia to Germany, both of which have exports of large export economies, you would go, well, I'd much rather be the German economy that's exporting high-grade industrial manufacturing equipment and making a buck off of it than making sandals and little hats and fanny packs and things. So
Right.
and same with the 80s. Like you look at the 80s, I do know this, that when you look at like steel exports, like we're exporting now than we were in the 1980s. It's not that we quit making stuff, it's that we became more efficient at it. So there are less jobs in steel manufacturing because we automated a lot of them. But weirdly, people don't, they never think about this with farmers when we talk about exports. Like in 1900, about 80%, I want to say, of the working population was farmers. If we go back to 1880, it's like 95% of the country. No one thinks that we don't have farmers anymore because we quit growing food. The reason that we have so few farmers is because they're goddamn rocket scientists. My uncle's a farmer in Alice, Oklahoma. He's a rocket scientist for wheat. He is like PhD level agronomist. And all of the farmers that I know and have met have crazy technology. I was in Scotland a couple years ago and randomly was at somebody's farm and they're like, oh, would you like to ride around in the tractor? And I went, I would love to ride in your tractor. We'll talk about short red wheat versus what I'm used to in Oklahoma. This will be good fodder for the family when I get back. We got inside of the space shuttle that happens to have a thresher on it and looked at the heat map he had of his farm on a square footage basis, where he could look and go, yeah, that part last year was about 8% less productive than the rest of it. So I've been focusing on that. Like, our farmers are so unimaginably, insanely productive that I, a guy from Oklahoma who's descended from farmers, can talk into a microphone for a living. That's a good thing. That's a positive development.
I like affording food.
Yeah.
Civil is on a mission to host ideas that will lead humanity to an abundant future. Civil is a streaming platform with apps on TV and mobile. Watch shows, films, and debates and be part of an emerging community of people who believe we can innovate beyond our legacy system built on coercion and zero-sum politics. Join Civil and let's build a new era of prosperity together. Learn more at civil.com. That's CIVL.com.
Look, the hallmark, I think, one of the primary ones of a healthy, functional society is how much food they throw away.
Yeah.
Right? If you can scoop food into the garbage out of your fridge and put it in the bin outside, you've got a pretty good life. Because I've been to places and lived in places where nobody does that.
My great-grandmother, who I have a few handfuls of memory from, she was born in 1889. And so she was a full-fledged adult during the Great Depression. And when we would go visit Grandma Bickle, side note, real quick on Grandma Bickle, I was talking to my dad about Grandma Bickle Thanksgiving a couple of years ago, and he went, oh, tough old bird, Grandma Bickle. Went blind at 92, quit driving 94, died at 96 years old. And I went, can we go over the chronology real quick on Grandma Bickle? And he said, oh, we got to understand, she spent her whole life at Alva. She knew all the turns, so she just kind of knew how to get to the grocery store. So apparently she would just drive blind to the grocery store. But we would go hang out with Grandma Bickle when we were back in town, and she'd make us these sumptuous grandmother feasts, and then she would take the aluminum foil off of the casserole, wash it, dry it, fold it into a neat square, and place it in her cabinet along with a stack of other aluminum foil next to a jar of rubber bands. Her basement looked like a prepper basement, and it wasn't that she thought, it's just she came about in the Great Depression, and you didn't want to waste anything. And today it makes more sense for me to buy disposable pens than it does for me to figure out how to take the time to put into the thing. And it's just we're doing better. That's why.
It turns out that the Great Depression was perfect training for hoarders.
Yeah.
But we had our own Grandma Bickle in my house. She was known as Aunt Louise. And Aunt Louise died at 100. was a fully formed adult during the Great Depression. And she also went blind. And she had this little Volkswagen that she used to drive to work. What did she do for a living? Fed old people at a retirement home. She was in her 80s at the time. And she was so blind that she couldn't play cards anymore. And we had the cards with the gigantic, and I said, Aunt Louise, how is it that you drive to work if you can't even see a playing card right in front of your eyes? And she said, well, I just concentrate on the yellow line.
Yep. On the note of cars, to go back to that, that's one of the other things. So like when you look at the major household expenditures that people have, it's going to be food, healthcare, transportation, and education if you're carrying student loan debts, which we can talk about in a minute, which college was cheaper then. That's one of the things they got going. But with cars, transportation, already mentioned that it was the two-car household was an aberration. That was what the wealthy people did. But for everybody on the ground, cars were more expensive overall. Now, for people doing surface level analysis, they can look at that and go, when you adjust for inflation, cars were cheaper in the 1950s than they were now. And that's technically true, but you need to factor in two other considerations. Consideration one is the cars were really crappy and they broke down constantly, and you generally had to get a new car every 3 or 4 years. Whereas I have a 2018 Ford Explorer outside right now, and I think it's probably going to be the last combustion engine I own. And I imagine it'll probably go for another 5 or 10 years. So we buy cars less frequently because they're in such better shape. So you're spending less money on your car budget. And then on top of that, gasoline is cheaper now. That sounds crazy to people, but when you adjust for inflation, gasoline's cheaper now than it was in the 1950s. So the overall amount of money you were spending on your car was less than it was back then.
Yeah, not just cheaper, but you're getting significantly higher miles per gallon.
Yes.
So the cost to drive a mile is which explains why electric cars had such a hard time catching on in this country, because internal combustion engine cars are so cheap.
Yeah. Well, and then I don't remember, we might have been talking about this before we started recording, but the cars were just really bad. And I will acknowledge they looked cooler. Yeah. I like the fins. The aesthetics were great. I'm not militating against that. But you watch Back to the Future and everybody's waxing their car. That's kind of the trope of cars in the 1950s. You get the idea that people just really took care of their stuff. No, what was the reason that people were waxing the car in the 1950s is they hadn't yet developed a rust-proof exterior for automobiles. And so you had to wax your car every week or it would rust. And there are these stories you find where the floorboards would rust out from under people's feet and they'd have to put cardboard down like Fred Flintstone. Like these were crappy. Again, these are like kind of, we would now view them as like Soviet automobiles, and nobody would buy them except for, very specific collectors and things. But it overall way better now.
And Heaton, I'm plenty old enough to have waxed cars in my life, and it sucked.
Yeah.
God almighty. It was backbreaking work. There was no thanks at all in it. It was just something you kind of had to do. But there's another thing that we should talk about if we're going to linger on cars for a while. You're very, very unlikely to die in one now.
Yeah.
And Ant and I have said this many times in front of many audiences. In our generation, none of us, there wasn't a single one of us who didn't know somebody who died in a car accident.
Yeah.
Usually multiples. Present generations, it's an aberration. Statistical noise. It's astonishing, the difference from
It's
then
a great
to
point.
now.
They're way safer. You go back to the 50s, seatbelts were not standard for one thing. I think they'd been invented, but they weren't standard. And you were driving a death trap, which could absolutely get you. Some of the things that we could quibble on, the minimum wage was higher in the 1950s when you adjust it for inflation. I think that's for those of us that don't like price controls. One of the secrets we have that I don't broadcast is that the minimum wage kind of takes care of itself because we're not adjusting it for inflation, so it just drops down over time. But it was higher when adjusted for inflation. But one of the other statistics you have to factor in is that we've had large growth in employer benefits since the 1950s as well. In the 1950s, you might have health insurance, but it's going to be pretty minimal because, again, we're talking about like antibiotics and getting your arm broken. And you might have a pension, which I would argue is much worse because if your company goes out, you're done. Whereas today, I control my 401k. That wasn't invented until what, the 70s or the 80s? But you did have pensions. You had a slightly higher minimum wage, but now the amount of employer benefits that a company's wages in the United States is significantly higher. It's one of the things that's left out when people look at wages and wage decline of, well, from the perspective of the employer, they're spending way more money. And when you look at wages overall, wages are better now than they were in the 50s. People are earning more. And that's, I didn't get so granular as to look at like the bottom 15%, but when you're looking at median wages for normal people in the country, they're higher now than they were in the 1950s.
Yeah, adjusted for inflation.
Yeah,
higher.
yeah.
And that's one of the things. People who talk about wage stagnation, and this comes around on Facebook every once in a while, they'll post this thing. Take a look at it, because if they're saying the word wages, they're leaving out the employer-paid benefits.
Yeah.
The term is compensation. Look for compensation.
Yes, good point. I will say
I'd like to ask each of you a question, if I could. Thinking about 1950s land, we could go visit. In your mind, what would be the absolute best thing about it?
I think the aesthetics would be great. I do like the aesthetics of the 1950s. I was dressed like this before I came on. For people that can't see me right now, I'm dressed like a British game show host. I'm wearing what's called a club jacket. I look ridiculous. I dress this way on my own. I like that people put on suits to go on planes, probably because only rich people flew in the 1950s, and I wouldn't be able to afford airfare back then. And if you were rich, you put on a suit. But okay, I think the aesthetics would be good. I think I think that the two things that we could say about the 50s, well, I'll do my litany of things they got us beat on, and then the stuff that I would like about it, where I had to go back then. So where they've got us beat, college was cheaper in the 50s. You have the GI Bill, and then independent of the GI Bill, just the amount of tuition that was being charged was significantly lower. Now, I will argue that that is to a great extent because college degrees are a positional good, and you cannot equalize positional goods. If the utility of the diploma is that you have it and somebody else doesn't, and that marks you as better as an employee than them, you can't have everybody have a college degree and have it have the same economic utility to it that you used to have. And in the 50s, I think they actually did have a much healthier way of looking at college than we do, because I think starting around the 1980s, we decided everybody has to get a college degree or you're an idiot. And if you don't have a college degree, you just kind of failed. And that's it. You get to be, you sweep floors. You should have been smarter. Sorry, which I think is a horribly classist way to approach things. I think in the 50s, they did have a better way of looking at it, which was if you're really smart, you go to college and you should be proud of that. But you could also be smart and have a high status job that didn't involve college. My personal philosophy is I think we should look at liberal arts degrees, of which I'm a recipient, the way we look at Latin, which is if you speak Latin, that is impressive. And you're probably very intelligent and educated. But it would be fallacious to look at somebody who doesn't speak Latin and go, well, you're clearly a blithering idiot. So it was cheaper back then, but I think it's also because only, I want to say like 2% of the population had master's degrees and maybe 10% of the population had a college degree or any college experience. So they had us beat on that. If you're worried about inequality, the 50s is better than we were in terms of inequality. And I think that's part of why people yearn for the 50s, particularly older people. There was also much less awareness of people that were doing better than you. So in the 50s, you probably lived in a neighborhood that was pretty similar in terms of socioeconomic status and in terms of socioeconomic income. We're also coming off of the tail end of World War II, where there'd been a price control board that suppressed wages. And we're still seeing the lingering effects of that. So people, for vacation, you'd go camping somewhere in your state. And you had a crappy car, everybody else had a crappy car. Your house was about the same. So you didn't feel like you were getting screwed if you're worried about inequality. So if you're bothered by inequality, the 50s was more egalitarian. It was also poorer. I'm not willing to make that deal, but if you're willing to be poor, provided that all your neighbors are equally poor, it's got you beat there. Where I think we could give it some credit is that there appear to be, based on the work of Robert Putnam and others, there were stronger intermediate civil institutions at work in the 50s. And that's a really mouthful way of saying places that people hung out that weren't work or home. That did seem to be stronger back then. I think that the decline of that is almost entirely technological. If we were to go back a little bit further than that, Most of the roads prior to Eisenhower in the country were gravel. Me being a squire of Oklahoma, I can tell you when you're driving down a gravel road, you don't really want to do that at 60 miles an hour, particularly in an old-timey death trap. You want to do it at like 15 miles an hour. So you're going to just drive real slowly through the neighborhood. You're going to have the opportunity to see all of the people that don't own air conditioning units that are hanging out on their front porch. And so, yeah, you probably did have a more communal feel back then. And I would love to get back to that. You also had television came real quick. Like television came out, like 1948, I think, is when they become commercially available. And like 80% of the households in America had them by 1956. But they weren't, you had like 3 stations you could watch, and it like
up to 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, I was about to say, and then it's the Pledge of Allegiance, then it's static. So as a result, people went and did mini golf or joined the Elks Lodge or the Rotary Club, whatever it was, in order to entertain themselves. And so in that capacity, people might have been less lonely. I think that it's hard for me to quantify that, but I think that that's a fair bet that people were less alienated and isolated. But also worth pointing out that atrophy we have is precisely because we are more affluent and technological. And maybe we need to work around that. We need to come up with new institutions, all of which I'm in favor of. But it's because we're wealthier that those things happen, not despite them.
Yeah, and let me underline here that people who are really concerned about this and yearn for that lifestyle, you can have it. Just don't buy a television.
Yeah.
Go join a local, there are plenty of local organizations. You take the back roads through town instead of the highway.
Yeah.
It'll take you longer, but you'll see your neighbors. You can live that way now. But the fact that people choose not to tells me that, they're saying they want it, but they actually don't.
One of my good friends, Chris Moody, he's a journalist who lives in North Carolina. He and his wife are very conscientious about this. And when they moved to North Carolina and they started a family, they called the phone company and they went, "We want to install a landline and we want to get rid of the internet." And the phone company didn't understand what they were talking about because they don't have cell phone reception where they are. So they have mobile phones, they have smartphones, but they can't access them on Wi-Fi and they can't get carrier signals. But they were very intentional. They went, "No, we want to have a landline so we can call people from home, we can talk to our family, but we don't want to have distractions." So they will watch movies and things, but they have to go into town and download them and then decide what they're going to watch. And they can't mess around on their phone. And I applaud that. I think that's great. I think a lot of people would actually be much happier if they do that. But the reality, as you point out, Ant, is that most people don't want to do that.
And it's interesting because the first thing that would make me happy about being in 50s land is the silence, right? Instead of being bombarded from every device in my house, from yet another message or ping or whatever, boy, it'd be nice to just have a break from that. And then, of course, the first thing I think is I'm sitting here online right now, looking at the two of you right now. And as soon as we're done, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to flip open my laptop and I'm going to turn on my TV on my back porch, which gets to a point, Andrew, that you made a minute ago. People don't sit on their front porches anymore because now they have back porches.
Yeah.
They sit in the back on purpose, right? They don't want to see people. And frankly, I do want to be online and fully integrated. How do I know? My revealed preferences. What do I do every day? I wake up and I do that. I think I do it a lot less than some people, but I still do it every day. I don't think anybody would want to go back to 50s land. I think there are all kinds of things there that we would find charming, and we would love to vacation there, right? And because it sounds to me like 50s land, not unlike Portugal. And when I went to Portugal, I was perfectly happy to be there, right? Did all of my devices work? No, not by a long shot. No, they did not. And that was fine. I found a cafe to go to and just hang out. And so I think ultimately a nice place to visit, wouldn't want to live there. And the most pernicious thing, I think, when we think about the fetishization of the 1950s is the TV show Happy Days. It is, because it presented a vision of the 50s to a bunch of people who never lived through it, that had almost nothing to do with regular life in the 50s.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to your point as well, James, on the one hand, we've I think had a decline in social capital and interconnectedness, but in other capacities, we're far more interconnected in a very positive way.
Way more.
I presently live in Alexandria, Virginia, on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. My family is in Oklahoma. If I were living in 50s land, and they were, apparently 50s land is a huge country that we just discovered, but if we're living in 50s land, I'm not going to, first of all, I'm probably not going to visit them every year for Christmas. As it is now, I can hop on a plane because I can afford the plane flight, but I couldn't do that. Maybe every 3 or 4 years, maybe, if I'm doing okay. And if I want to talk to him, like not even that long ago, when I was growing up in the 80s, when my dad wanted to talk to my uncle in the same state, in Alva, they would do a phone call like maybe twice a year. That was a big deal because it was expensive, long distance. And this is in the 80s. In the 50s, if I wanted to talk to my parents weekly in Oklahoma from Washington, D.C., or I wanted to do WhatsApp text messages with my friends in Scotland or talk to my buddy Jennings, who lives in the Dallas area, that I would have to be a prince to have that kind of connectivity. I would basically communicate with them through letters and postcards, and I would have to have a completely different social life that treated everybody else as a memory that I could occasionally interact with in a very, very indirect manner.
Yeah, there was a 1-month lag on international communications, right? Because it would take at least 2 weeks for the letter to get to you and at least 2 weeks for your response to get back. Meanwhile, in 2010, I took a job in Iraq and I was able to communicate with my family in real time by video over Skype at the time.
Yeah.
In a country that had almost no infrastructure.
Yeah. And like,
do that.
I go camping in national forests, and if I'm going to get work done, I bring a Starlink, and I can be out in the middle of nowhere and get work done. I mean, like even when I graduated from college in '07, I went to Europe for the first time, and I wanted to call my dad for Father's Day. This is in '07. To call my dad for Father's Day, I had to get one of those ridiculous calling card things where you have to put in 4 different combination codes. And the phone I had that could do it didn't have the right plug for France, but I happened to have a wind-up flashlight that had a plug on it. So for me to call my dad, I had to plug it into the flashlight and wind the handle like an old-timey Edison phone. And then while doing that, figure out how to use this goddamn calling card and then talk to my dad for 20 minutes. Like we're way like now for free. We can just talk to each other anywhere in the world.
You know, you're talking about the nostalgia of the TV programs, and there's one that's worth mentioning, The Honeymooners, that actually was the prototype, I shouldn't say the prototype, but the Flintstones, the cartoon, was based on this, I guess you could call it a sitcom. It was before the sitcoms. But if you watch this show, The Honeymooners, which I believe is set in the 30s/40s, you would look at this and think this is about the depths of poverty. They've got this grungy apartment that's basically 3 rooms, a bathroom, a bedroom, and the kitchen/sitting thing, and there's this grungy little stove. This was a middle-class family.
Yeah.
They were depicting a middle-class family.
They were doing pretty well, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and like on that note too. So when I did this episode on is life better in the 50s, I explicitly was looking at economics, but you know, it's worth pointing out too that like I definitely wouldn't want to be gay or black in the 1950s, and I don't think I'd want to be a woman, to be honest with you.
I wouldn't want to be a woman either. That's right.
Yeah, I feel like again, if 50s land were around today, we would be protesting it because half of it's an apartheid state. And we would be wildly and correctly condemnatory of the pink scare actively going on in the country, where people are being hounded in the most totalitarian moment of American history for being gay. So like those are all very positive developments we've had.
And even if we wave them away with a magic wand, and these are gigantic social issues, right? That each deserve their own deep, long conversation. But if we could just wipe them away, we still wouldn't want to go there.
Now, it would be really fun to visit in the same way that it's fun to go to a charming, quaint place that part of the fun is that you can't bring your iPhone. It would be fun to visit.
And hope to God you don't have a heart attack when you're there.
Yeah. Thank you for having me back on.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And given that you've just done a twofer for us, you've unlocked a reward. Do you have anything you'd like to publicize in any way?
I do. So when I'm not moonlighting on this show, I host the Political Orphanage. And if you want a more full and funnier dive into the 1950s, there's an episode that I did on the Political Orphanage called Was Life Better in the 50s? It's about an hour and a half, and it's me visiting this country, chain smoking an incredible amount, drinking whiskey at banks at 9 a.m., at one point, I kind of ruin a marriage. It's very funny, but we get into a lot of the stuff here. So that's Was Life Better in the 50s on the Political Orphanage.
I like the idea of smoking all the time. That sounds really good.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. You know, I was in Austria a few years ago. They still smoke in airports. At least they did when I was there. And I was like, don't want to do this regularly, but kind of fun for a weekend.
When I lived in Iraq, I smoked in a grocery store. Anyway, thanks for coming, Andrew. It's always, and I mean always, a pleasure. So
thank you very much.
Take care of yourself, and it won't be so long before we find you again.
I hope not. Good to see you guys.
If you like Words and Numbers, check out civil.com/wordsandnumbers and join Civil to get access to film, shows, and live events for those who are interested in upgrading civilization by innovating beyond our legacy systems. Get Civil's apps on TV and mobile. Learn more at civil.com. That's CIVL.com.